Hello, everyone. First, let me thank you all for coming out today. We appreciate you taking the time to join us for our conference. My name is Carl Brundage. I am the co-leader of the Lehigh Valley Salesforce Developers Group. So if you're up in the Allentown area, we would love to have you come out. Thank you. I'm excited to introduce our next speaker. Whether you've just started on your Salesforce journey or you're an experienced veteran, you most likely have relied on one of his resources, whether that's the Force.com Enterprise Architect book, one of your many Andy in the Cloud blog posts, or even a community project like declarative lookup rollup summaries. Previously, Andy was Chief Technology Officer at FinancialForce, where he oversaw a rapidly growing team. FinancialForce was a provider of accounting and ERP solutions inside of our ecosystem. A longstanding Salesforce MVP, Andy is now on the inside, helping all of us as VP of Product Management on the platform team at Salesforce. He's working closely with Salesforce DX team, enhancing the experience of developers on the platform. So please give a warm Philly welcome for Andy Fawcett.
Thank you. Excellent introduction. Thank you very much. Wow, what a wonderful venue. So thank you very much for asking me to come along and present to you this morning. I've created what I hopefully be a compelling deck covering both admin and developer topics and seeing how both of those can intertwine. Before we go a little further, let's cover obviously the obligatory forward-looking statement. We ask you to make your decisions, your purchasing decisions on features and functionality that's available today. If you'd like to know more about that wonderful statement, you can of course find it on the website. So let me set the scene for the session we have over the next hour or so. And I chose this template. This is obviously, some of you might recognize this. It's from our standard Salesforce template. But I really liked the image that's been depicted on the right-hand side there because it shows Cody, a developer, helping his colleagues, the App Exchange, Cloudy, and Astro, get up the mountain. And they're doing it together. As characters individually, they're very strong in their own right, but they're working and leveraging their individual skills to build a solution and make the journey more effective. So that's the story of this session, and hopefully we'll weave through some elements that will give you some inspiration of how you can work better together with different skilled people in the ecosystem. The platform obviously is a main enabler for that, but obviously, as some of you well know, I'm a bit of an API junkie, so APIs are very key to making that story happen. We, of course, have then tools like Process Builder and Workflow that sit on top of the platform. And we've got the apps from the App Exchange, the community that I have in front of us here, a very strong part of that journey, leveraging blogs and content and open source is another part of that equation. So all of these things factor into making these individuals super-powered individuals to get them up that mountain. So in order to tell this story, I broke down this session into 3 main chapters. The first chapter is going to talk about packages. Now, don't worry, this isn't just an ISV topic. Packages are actually available to customers through DX packaging. So I know that you've probably seen enough content on DX already, so I'm hopefully going to give you a different view of what packages look like and how you can use them that you might not have seen before. Then we're going to talk about org composition. Many of you are probably responsible for orgs that have got large, complex configurations, and you need to perform some routine housekeeping, understand the composition of those orgs, particularly if you want to decompose those and leverage packages. Finally, we're going to look at Lightning Flow. And for me, Lightning Flow, I am a self-confessed fanboy of Lightning Flow. Love that, blog about it quite a lot. But it is the epitome of the journey that we were just describing earlier. It combines the best of declarative development, and with the Flow APIs, we can combine that with coded solutions to create the ultimate combination of clicks not code and code working together. So let's start the journey by talking about packaging. So historically, packaging has been something that has not been felt as a useful tool. It's been something that you've been using as a customer to install things from App Exchange. And how many ISV partners? Is there any ISV partners in the room? Okay, 1 or 2. So this gentleman there will already have been appreciating some of these aspects as an ISV partner. It's typically used to build and deliver commercial apps. You can encompass all of your common constructs and objects that you want to deploy to your customers. Importantly, as a commercial offering, you can encapsulate your intellectual property. You can't see the code from managed packages. And you can also roll out upgrades and deploy those to your install base. We heard from the nonprofit chap earlier that he's actually deploying and pushing that application out to a number of customers. So ISV partners are already leveraging packages. So what purpose can they serve in terms of a customer context? Well, this is a slightly different use case. Some of those concerns on the left-hand side, you're not particularly that concerned about. Intellectual property is your own. It's only going to sit in your org. Why have some of the constraints that applies? You're also probably not going to share it beyond your own uses. So you're going to be wanting to understand how you can capture some of your own applications that you've built in your org. You're also wanting to understand how you can version, install them, and upgrade them. So this is a mechanism for you to break down and decompose your org into discrete parts. And we'll show something, I'll show in the demonstration how you actually get to create those packages and how you get to install them. But essentially the message is that you want to be able to update and customize for easier management in large organizations. Even if your organization isn't that large, you might want to start thinking in a more modular decomposition way. So in order to illustrate this, we're going to use a popular little app that was first sort of brought to light at TDX recently this year called GiftA. It's written by Wade Wagner, and Wade created this wonderful application using the DX technology for us to live and breathe animated GIFs of cats and dogs with our colleagues in Chatter. But there is a challenge with it. It isn't available as a package, so I chose first of all to illustrate how we can package that. And also I wanted to highlight some possibilities for the future in terms of how we might package up open source. Open source is a growing and thriving industry amongst many of, including myself in this room, will be contributing around the platform. But sometimes it is a little difficult to get and manage all of those open source libraries. So let's see how packaging can help with that as well. So I have here my production org. And just for ease, what I have done is created some installation links in the bookmark bar here. But before I go and run those installations, let me just show you briefly what commands I use. So we're not going to go into deep level of code here, but what you're seeing here is what is Salesforce DX project running in Visual Code. And I ran 2 commands to create the package. Once I'd developed this application, I'd used my Scratch orgs, I was happy to release it. How do I get it in the hands of my admin? So I could just deploy this using traditional techniques and push it in, or I could create it in a self-contained package. So the first thing I did was run the package create command. And that kind of creates the box that you're going to put your app into. And that box will continue to have new versions of your application and your code over time. So I created the box. The second thing I did, and this is the iterative piece of it, is just run this command to create a version of that box, and then I made that box available. So it is possible with tools like CI-based tools to automate the installation of this package if you wanted to. But maybe CI is a little bit too complicated for your needs. You're a small team. You just want to install things the traditional way. So one of the outputs from that version command is actually the package URL, which looks pretty much, in fact, identical to a regular package installation URL that you get from AppExchange. But it's yours. It's your package for your use. So with those URLs in mind, I created the GiftA package, and we'll see the installation experience unfold as I click through the links. So first of all, I've got one version of that package, and I can click that link. And that immediately loads the installation screen. If you've ever installed an AppExchange package, this should be familiar. I can also see the contents of this package. And there's the contents. And I can click through to make the installation. Now it's recognized that it's making a call out to the GiftA platform, which serves up these wonderful GIFs. And I'm accepting that installation. So it's a fairly small package, so hopefully things are going to perform pretty swiftly for me, since joking and dancing isn't part of my repertoire usually. So we'll just wait for that to complete, and then we'll observe what the contents of the org is in terms of the package installation. Okay, wonderful. So we click Done, And it immediately takes us back to the package installation screen. So we'll see that I have indeed got some App Exchange packages, in fact some open source packages from myself and Doug Ayers. But also we can see GiftA is installed. Observe the icon is slightly different. This is what's known as an unlocked package. There's different flavors, and I won't go too much into the detail of packages for customers, but you can elect whether or not you want this package contents to be editable in your production org, which might be useful if in a pinch you really need to make a change before the developers can actually release a new version of it. Obviously, the locked variant of this package doesn't allow you to do that. So at the moment, the unlocked package is the one that we're focusing on. But let's take a look at the contents of that package. We briefly looked at that during installation, but now that it's actually installed, if we were to look at, for example, the Lightning component, we can see we now get a banner at the top reminding us that what you're looking at is something that's come from a package. It's not just been arbitrarily created in your production org. It's actually arrived. If I go to see the classes, amongst all the other classes from the managed packages that I've got installed, I again see the Chatter Helper class, which is part of that package. And I get the same confirmation. Notice that I can edit that class if I wanted to. I could even delete it. So this is the power of unlocked packages. The decision is yours as to how you work with your development team, but it's very clear from the setup UI and the different banners that you're seeing that it belongs to a package, so you've got some warning. Now, if you make changes to this and then do another install, it will overwrite it. This is the gist of the message that's being shown on screen. So I know you're all dying to see some animated cats, so let's give this application a whirl. And it's been, best practices have been followed here, and we're using a permission set. So it's super easy to deploy this to our users simply by assigning the permission set to the current user that I'm running, which is this one. Okay, and then we should find that GiftA is available in our Launchpad. Perfect. Okay, so let's run a query. Cats. Wonderful. So we'll just take a brief moment to enjoy. My particular favorite is the middle one. I do like that, wiggling his bum. Okay, so back to the presentation. Alex probably wouldn't be too happy with me if I just stood here for the rest of it looking at GIF images. Okay, so let's go. Yeah, it'd be a good survey result, I'm sure. Right, so I did promise you that packages are also upgradable. So the developers have provided a new version of the package, and again, they've just rerun that version command. So you simply just run that again, it'll give you a new version and a new package URL. You hand that over to your admin. So that's install v1.1. And we get a slightly different user experience now. It's informing us that the upgrade's about to occur, and we can view the components that are inside that package. And then we can complete the upgrade. Now, an interesting capability of this process is that typically with a managed package from a partner, you can only go forwards. You can actually go backwards with these unlocked packages. Remember that you're responsible for what happens if you edit the code or the integrity of that code inside your production org. So if you feel comfortable, you've worked with your developers, and that new release isn't quite what you want to go back, we'll just install the package I installed a few moments ago again, and you'll roll back. So it's a really efficient way of rolling back certain changes as well using packages. So I'm not going to demonstrate that. I think we've seen enough of the GiftA package. So before I move on to the next chapter, I do want to take a moment to call out open source. So typically, if we wanted to use an open source module in our production org, we would get all of that down into local disk, and we would use the metadata API, some other tool to deploy that, and it would just become loose components inside our packaging org. What's more if we actually failed to deploy something that open source library was dependent on, we would get a slew of errors saying all sorts of compilation problems, and we weren't quite sure as to whether that was our fault or whether we'd forgotten to do something beforehand. So most of you already know that I'm very associated with the PhillyForce open source libraries, and the PhillyForce Apex Enterprise Patterns library is dependent on another library called Apex Mocks. And you have to deploy mocks first before you can deploy the Apex Enterprise library. So it turns out that packaging not only gives us a way of packaging both these libraries together, but actually expressing the dependency between the two of them. So I've gone ahead and actually packaged both of these up for this demonstration. Now I'm going to deliberately try and install the Apex Enterprise library, knowing that I haven't got the dependencies installed. And let's see what happens. So this is just a one-off package. I don't plan on sharing this in the immediate future anyway. I think it's probably pertinent for the owners of the open source repositories to share these packages. But we can see now that we've got a nice error message on the screen that tells us that you can't install this open source library because another open source library hasn't been installed, a prerequisite. So finally, we're starting to get a feel that other platforms have started to have enjoyed for many years now. If you look at NPM and the libraries that you can install in there, and you've got prerequisites and pulling those sort of things in, it's starting to turn the corner in terms of having greater visibility and control over packaging. Okay, so I'm not going to go ahead and install the rest of the packages there. In fact, I will actually install the library so you can just get a glimpse of what Apex Mocks looks like if I run the right one. Otherwise, I'm just going to repeat the same demo you just saw. Let's go ahead and just install FF Mocks. And that's also a very small package. I did seriously consider doing screenshots for you guys, but I thought I'd challenge myself on the performance of Salesforce. And so far, so good. I may have jinxed it. Come on. Let's see. I've just got the email on my phone, so that's a reassuring sound. Fantastic. Okay, so we can see now that, yep, sure enough, Apex Mocks has been installed. So if the open source community releases another version of it and they happen to be using this packaging strategy, I just take the URL and I make that installation and upgrade that. And I can see the version of it and other details, and I can also see the contents of it. As many of you might be familiar with Apex Mocks know, you've got all of the different the classes in there, the mocking, and various other components. Good, okay, so we could go on and install the fflib library at this point, and that is also another set of Apex classes, and we'll leave that installing in the background. The process is much the same. Okay, so let's move on to the next chapter of packaging. Actually, before we do that, let me just recap on what we've just seen. We've seen that packaging are localized groups of source and metadata. We see that projects can be tested independently. So I was actually in Salesforce DX there. I could independently spin up a Scratch org, test that code, run it in CI and continuous development before creating that package. In effect, I was doing many of the best practices that ensure software quality that ISVs have been doing for many years already, but I'm doing that internally as a customer. Projects can be released independently. I don't have to think about monolithic upgrades to my org. If I just want to update certain components in isolation in their own self-contained packages, I've got much more fine-grained control over that. I can increase my release flexibility and my developer productivity, and as we've seen, we can also consider package dependencies as well. Okay, so let's talk about org composition a little bit. So essentially, your org is a living organism of configuration and data, and the configuration represents its health. An org that's got lots of configurations been made over the years, that hasn't been documented well or followed any naming conventions, can get very cumbersome to navigate and understand. So the health of your org is expressed in how well you really know the key objects and the fields that they depend on. You know, if somebody pointed you to a field that was created 4 years ago, do you really know who's now using that field if you wanted to delete it or create another field that has a similar purpose How do you actually know about that information? You might want to be able to group things. You might want to start using packaging. So how do you know what is a safe grouping of components to actually take out and use as a package? You need to do some housekeeping, potentially. Before you go any further, you might need to do some dead wood, some deleting of certain things and clean things up. So you should be asking yourself, what are the main features in your org? Generally, you could consider these the entry points. What tabs do users use initially for that piece of functionality? What object? What buttons do they click on? And then figure out the dependencies of those things and the dependencies of those. Now, you sat here listening to me thinking, well, that's all very good, Andy, but I haven't a clue how to start doing that. Well, it is a bit of a tease, because how many people have actually tried to delete a custom field and been presented with a screen that says it's used in all of these areas? Yeah, quite a lot of you. So clearly Salesforce knew about all of these dependencies, but we just weren't telling you all about it in a way that you could use it properly. So we were pleased to announce at TDX the Dependency API. This is a pilot for the summer release, and you will be able to use it initially in API form. We'll obviously be working on exposing this through a UI. And its API is pretty simple. It's an object. So if you know how to query objects, you can query for the relationships that exist in your org. And at least from the Salesforce DX command line, you will get a table back that looks something like this. And it will basically show you the relationships. We can see that the red custom field is used by these layouts and these Apex classes and these flows. But it's still not all that visual. And the community has spoken. What? Wait. I need this, but I don't quite understand it. Okay, so bear with us. We're getting there. APIs rock. APIs are the foundation of where we need to move forward on, but we need to improve usability as well. So what I'd like to demonstrate is a sample DX command that we've created, and it is a sample. It will be out in the open source, and it helps you visualize those dependencies. So I'm going to demonstrate the Dependency API through this visualization tool. So to do that, what I've done is on my split screen here on the right, I have the command line, and it's called and in the cloud depends. And the bit to the right here is just simply some Unix magic that pipes the output to a file. And the thing above in the top right-hand corner is the output of that file visualized graphically. Impressive, right? It's a box. It's a white box on a gray screen. That's because the thing on the left doesn't have any components in it yet. I've deliberately created a completely empty org. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep rerunning the command on the right as I incrementally make changes to the org, just so you get a better feel. And the thing that's being output at the bottom right-hand corner is not the output that you saw on the previous screen. It's what's called dot format. It's a textual format that describes graphs. Okay, so let's make a very simple start to this demo by creating a custom field on account. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new field called red, just to represent, maybe this account is a red account. I'm going to make that a checkbox. And we're going to go through the usual wizard, place it on some layouts, and I'm going to rerun that command. So now we're starting to see the relationships building. We can now clearly see that this field is used by those layouts. That was very quickly done. The wizard added all those fields to the layouts. I did get the option to deselect those layouts if I wanted to. So let's do something else. Let's make this a little bit more interesting. Formula field references. How many people have struggled to figure out how many fields are referencing all the formulas that they've got? Yeah, loads of people. Definitely been there themselves as well. So let's create on the case object. We know that case is related to account. So let's see if we can create a formula field that references that field so that it's easier to access the value of that field when looking at cases. So I'm going to go ahead and create a formula field. And give that a very basic formula. So we'll call that something like account status. Say if account dot red underscore c is red. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and create that field. Okay. Any prizes for, there isn't actually any prizes. Is there any prizes, Alex? But does anybody want to guess what we'll see if I refresh it next? Anybody want to have a go? No? You should see an arrow to cases. Anything else that you might see? Yeah, well done. Excellent. Okay, things are getting a bit more interesting. So let's take this a step further. Let's add Process Builder. That's a real bag of dependencies that seems a bit of a black art at times. So let's go to Process Builder. And we'll create a very basic process. I'll rattle through these steps. Of course, we want to add it on the account object. I'll do it for record creation and edit. Not that it matters too much. I aren't going to run this process builder. And we should be able to reference the red fields. Okay. I have a feeling that that is due to the permissions on that field. Okay, so yeah, what I'm going to do is just grant myself permissions on that. I believe we've got enough time to do that. Okay, go to the setup menu and let's just quickly add that to the particular profile. So that'll be users. Okay, and that should go via profiles. You know, for a dev doing this in front of a load of admins, it's really nerve-wracking. So let's go for the system admin screen. Account. That's the account layout. Okay. And our red field, yep, okay, sure enough, is not available. So that's why Process Builder was not showing that up. Lesson learnt. Yay, thank you. Okay, we're not done yet. We're not done yet. If it doesn't show up, I do have a contingency plan. Okay, so yes, okay, cool. So the red field's appearing. We'll just accept that criteria, give it some title. Okay, so it's not very operational, but it's enough for us to be able to appreciate the dependency that's now being created. So you can see right down at the bottom here, this is a flow. Now, behind the scenes, a process builder is a flow. It's the way it's stored internally in the metadata. So it's kind of funky the way it shows up as a flow, but you can see the dependency there. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is write a bit of code. And this is also live coding. There's also another thing that they say not to do on stage, but I'm going to go for it anyway. I ought to be able to do this one, eh? My apex action. Okay, so let us now reference this method, which is just going to be called run. Take some parameters and returns absolutely nothing. And we're going to make it an invocable method. I'm going to save that. Okay. Now this won't show up if I was to refresh it because nothing's referencing it. It's kind of dead wood at this point. If we go back to the process builder and we can add an apex action, let's see if it's actually refreshed. Yes, it has. Excellent. So we'll go ahead and save that. Run my action. Yeah, the typo won't matter for the demo, he says. Okay, good. Okay, the graph's getting a little bit more complex. I'm going to do one more thing, which will hopefully finish off the power of what we've got in front of us with the Dependency API. So I'm going to make a query. I'm going to query that particular field. Save that class. Let's see what happens next. Okay, so we now see we've got the dependency from the flow to the Apex class, to the account actually, and also to the red field. So we've got a really good visualization of where all the dependencies are. Now in a more complex org, trust me, that graph gets very busy. So you will want to apply some filtering in reality, but hopefully it gives you a flavor of the power of that dependency API. Okay, but wait, what about this idea we're saying? Particularly Alex. Thank you, Alex. Never satisfied. So, one of the product managers that works in the team I work in, Vlad, responded. His team is on it. He's been looking at the dependency API. As I said earlier, it is the first step in providing more user experience and insight into your org. So watch this space. I know Vlad is very keen to get that in your hands as soon as possible. So let's move on to the final section, final chapter of our presentation this morning, and that's flow. So the myriad of features, it's had a tremendous amount of adoption, and with that, features that have been added to flow over the last 3 releases. And I wanted to call out particularly a theme that's developing, and that is a theme where flow is being coupled with code. So Cody and Astro are being combined together to build solutions that make flow and the code even more powerful. Where we'll be able to add Lightning components to flow. How many times have you built a Lightning flow and it kind of doesn't look right? You've had some workarounds, but you really want the UI to look in a certain way or render in a certain way. You know that there's a developer that can help you out, but they can't push their way into that flow experience. And now you can actually have Lightning components inside your flow. You can also use flow from within Apex. How many people are aware of what auto launch flows are? Okay, so an auto launch flow is a flow that's kind of like, I like to call headless. It has no UI. Most people know flow as a UI technology, but actually you can build very complex business processes inside flow. And if you can actually invoke those in the back end, you can do things that normally would require code. There is a balancing point between when you should stop using flow and start using Apex. But if you get that balancing point correct, then using flow to actually call some complex business logic is a really good solution in some cases. So the next few slides, and I've got some great demos of the way the community has embraced these APIs coming up to round off the session. These slides illustrate these capabilities. So in this case, Cody is a developer, and he's creating the world-beating, best ever Lightning component. And he realizes, though, that there's an element of that Lightning component that's very form data entry. And he wants to get some help from Astro. And Astro doesn't know code, but he knows flow. So Astro can actually start using flow by virtue of adding that line, Lightning : flow. And that will allow a particular flow that Astro defines to be ignited inside that Lightning component. So now we've combined, both of them are building this one Lightning component using their skills appropriately. Conversely, the other way around, Astro's happy with flow most of the time, 80–90% of the time it actually renders pretty much what he wants from a user experience. But there's some areas, particularly maybe uploading files or rendering other information, where he really could do that extra bit of horsepower. So Cody comes along with a Lightning component that's available directly from within the Flow Designer, and you can place that now inside the Flow Designer. So this is kind of the opposite of the previous slide. Here, Lightning component was driving the show with a bit of flow augmenting it. Here, flow is driving things and is being augmented with a bit of Lightning. So you've basically got a best of both worlds depending on what it is you're trying to build. And lastly, if you're building some Apex code and you feel as though there's an element of that Apex code that you could actually defer to flow, maybe it's something that's constantly being customized by the admin, and rather than reworking your Apex code, you actually entrust some of that execution flow to flow. So using the Flow API in Apex, you can create an instance of a flow, passing in some parameters to it, and actually invoke that flow. So it's a good extensibility model, kind of like a plug-in model for flows and Apex code. So in the last bit of the presentation, I did want to take some time to step through some community tools that have embraced flow. Remember back at the beginning of my deck, I talked about all the building blocks that make all the Trailblazers on the platform successful, and the community is part of that equation very much so. So let's think about, as we look at these two applications that are available in the open source, the APIs that we've created. There's APIs that allow us to invoke flow that admins have created. There's APIs that allow us to invoke a flow from a UI perspective anywhere in the user interface. What if we could put flow somewhere else? Maybe the utility bar, maybe a place that Salesforce hasn't thought about. So let's explore that through these two open source applications. Oh, there we go, our fflib finished installing from chapter 1. And we can see fflib down there. Wonderful. Okay, so first of all, let's introduce the two open source packages. The first one is Flow Toolbelt. Flow Toolbelt is a generic package, but it happens to encapsulate something called Dynamic Flow Component, or DFC. The second open source component is Mass Action Scheduler by my good friend and colleague, Doug Ayers. He has created this wonderful way of automating many actions using clicks not code technologies, both of which have two things in common. They embrace the Flow APIs. So how have they used the Flow APIs to build these solutions that further empower our clicks not coders? So the best way to start this is to have a look at some of the flows. I don't really have a great deal of time to drill into all of the flows. I'm around most of the day, so I'm happy to take more questions if you're still curious. But these are the flows that have been created to support the demos you're about to see. And predominantly what we're going to do is hang out on the account object and on the opportunity object. And accounts are invariably going to red status and not red status. And the requirement here is to actually bring attention to an account that's on the red status when you navigate to it. And you can do that with formula fields and images on the layouts. What if we actually had something in the utility bar that was kind of a status that told us that? But if the count wasn't in the red, maybe we want to have some utility there that helps us create opportunities more easily. So the dynamic flow component leverages the utility bar to create a contextual flow experience. And the first thing it does with the account is it uses the account auto flow. And this is a flow that's run every time in the background when the user's navigating to the account records. So the first time that this runs, it actually discovers whether or not it's a red account. If it is a red account, then it'll create some variables, and it'll send those variables back to the DFC component. And those variables are very strategically named and allow you to do some very powerful things that you couldn't do with Flow and would need a developer. You will be able to show the toast message, navigate to other parts of the system by simply setting up these variables accordingly. So let's see what this looks like in action. We're going to navigate to an account that's both a red account and a non-red account and see how this logic in this flow, and there is another flow that drives the UI that I'm not going to show you, but you'll get an idea from the demo in terms of what that other flow actually would look like. So we're going to go into the sales app, and you can see immediately the bottom left-hand corner, I've configured the utility bar. How many people are familiar with the utility bar? Okay, wonderful. Good chunk of you. So if you haven't, hopefully you're going to love this as well. I think the utility bar is a great innovation in terms of the container that Salesforce offers in terms of Lightning experience. So the dynamic flow component has a kind of courtesy UI that reminds you of how to configure it if you haven't. So all you do is go into the app manager and put that Lightning component on the utility bar, and that's it. But you do have to do some configuration. So if I'm moving around the different objects, then I am reminded that it's saying to configure the flow for the lead object, I need to do this in my custom metadata component. If I want to configure the flow for some tasks, then I get also the same kind of prompt, or contacts even. So I get a prompt down here. So now I've not configured it for these objects, but what you're seeing is the fact that it can actually run flows dependent on the object you're looking at, and you're also seeing that it's dynamically changing as you're navigating. It's refreshing itself. So it's tracking what's going on in the UI. So let's go to the account. And the first account we're going to go to is Dickinson PLC, and this is not a red account. So the sales assistant doesn't really do anything, but if I wanted to, I could run a flow that helps me create an opportunity. So it's automatically recognized that I'm running a particular flow for this account. But let's close that down, and let's imagine that we go to Burlington Textiles. This is a red account. Watch what happens next. So now we get a pop-up on the screen, a toast message, and this guy down here is telling us, look, there's something to look at, go check it out. So we've got a basic UI that allows us to adjust whether it's a hot account and give a description saying, oh, these guys are in trouble, or this is what we need to do. It's a very simple example. But the neat thing is as I'm navigating around, if I go back to Dickinson PLC, then it goes back to the regular color and I get the regular UI. So the UI is shifting contextually based on the values that are on the record. So the next thing to do is create an opportunity. And it demonstrates another feature of the dynamic flow component. If I just give it a value and I click next, it actually navigates me over to that opportunity. And it turns out that I actually also have some UI for the opportunity as well. I'm getting a nice little prompt that says, keep going, this opportunity is looking good. A bit optimistic perhaps since I just created it. But let's go and look at an opportunity that I happen to know is not in such good shape and see what happens next. So this one actually popped the utility bar up for me automatically. I didn't have to go and find it. It highlighted it at the bottom as well. So this is just a flavor of how the flow component that Salesforce have provided and the flow API can be wrapped in an additional tool and some framework that makes it easy to use. So there's a number of flows involved behind that scene. You saw a list of them earlier on the screen. So let's move over to Doug's solution, and let's take the use case of wanting to mass update accounts. In this scenario, I want to update the upsell opportunity field to let our sales team know that it's ready to be upsell to. And we only want to do that in certain criteria. And you could use the mass edit here and figure out, okay, well, this is a red account, don't want to perhaps upsell to them. But what if we could use flow to express that logic and conditionally update the records? So let's just have a quick look at that flow that's being run. And that's the upsell flow. Okay, so first of all, it reads the record, and then it does a decision to say whether or not it's a red account or not. And if it isn't a red account, that should actually say is not rather than is red. If it isn't a red account, then it'll go ahead and update the upsell field to, so flow designers, there we go, upsell field to true. So this in its own right isn't that powerful, because how do you tell it which accounts to update? How do you do that en masse? Well, Doug solved that problem for us with the rather excellent mass update updater. So let's go and take a brief look at that. It's here in the mass action scheduler. There's a rather impressive Lightning UI for it as well. So I've already created the upsell mass action configuration, but basically you've chosen the fact that you've given it a name, you've chosen that you want it to be list view driven, you can drive it from reports if you wanted to, you've chosen the object, and I've chosen the list view that I want to use, I want to drive this from. The next phase, I'll actually choose, there's a bit of a bug there, it should have pre-defaulted that. I'll choose the upsell flow, the one I just showed you is the one to run. So it's going to consume all the records that list view returned and run that flow for those. So it's easy to run that. So you can schedule it if you wanted to, which is obviously the more powerful option, but I'm just going to run that right here and now, just so we can see the effects of that running. Okay, bit of a lockup on the screen there. Oh, there we go, job submitted. Okay, so performance being optimal, we should see, yes, it's worked. So it said yes to all of the opportunities that were not in the sort of red account status, and no to all of the others. So that's a good example of how you can combine flow technology with an open source technology with the flow API to do some pretty cool functionality. Okay, so let's round up this session with with some resources. You're all asking, hopefully, where to find out more. Packaging-wise, it is in pilot. Actually, that's incorrect. It's in beta, is the packaging stuff. You can read all about it in these links. Obviously, we'll share the decks, and you'll be able to click these links for yourselves. There's also the Trailhead articles, and and also community. Likewise, with the Dependency API, there's full release notes for it, and it's a part of the tooling API. We're kind of calling it Dependency API, but it's really just an object in the tooling API. If you're interested in building your own commands, Oclef is a brand new framework by the Heroku team that's been open sourced. It makes it really easy to build CLI commands. It's actually non-trivial to write a really robust CLI command that handles error handling and flags and all that sort of stuff. So the Oclef takes a lot of the heavy lifting out of that particular development task. And of course, the community in open source, there's a Trailblazer community group linked with the pilot where people can talk about their findings or any issues, challenges, or new features they'd like to see. And the sample tool that I was demonstrating in Chapter 2 is available in that link as well. Lastly, the flow stuff that we looked at. Myriad of APIs. If you're an Apex developer, check out the Apex docs. Doug's tool actually uses the REST flow API really, really effectively. If you're interested in exploring how Lightning, components, and flow can work better together, that's the right link. And of course, Trailhead, again, for getting your head around that in your sort of Trailhead playgrounds. And finally, links to the 2 open source applications that I demonstrated. So, in conclusion, I feel like saying in conclusion, cats. I probably should have done. It should be a bit more. But I will say API and CLI-driven platforms rock. Basically, these things that you've seen today have been possible because of commitment to creating APIs and CLIs. Obviously, we want to build on top of those people that can't use these technologies, but it has to start from there. It's a very powerful proposition, because if you had to wait for a lot of these things to come out as UIs, it does cause some delay rather than deploying APIs in the first instance. And also, we get a little bit more time to shake out some of the requirements through APIs. So I'm really passionate about this way of delivering. We've seen this with Apex Mocks. If some of you remember, the stub API directly came out of the community's contribution for building a mocking framework. And instead of Salesforce building a mocking framework, they delivered an API to enable a mocking framework. And it's pretty much in place now. So we have 10 more minutes, and I'd love to take some questions on any of the topics you've seen today or anything else you'd quite like to ask me. Can't believe I just said that, but please go ahead. Take some questions.
Who's up first? Just so stunned with everything Andy showed you. Can't think of anything to ask. Somebody's got a question. Go for it.
What's the future of Dolores?
Yeah, good question. I was hoping somebody would ask that. Okay, so I'll put my other hat on. I'll put the Andy Fawcett, Andy in the Cloud hat on. I'll show you what I've been working on. So it's recently moved to DX format, which has really opened up the development process a lot more for me, particularly to work on things like multi-currency, dated roll-ups, those sort of things. Previously, my packaging org explicitly didn't have multi-currency switched on, and one of the benefits of DX is that you can actually create your own scratch orgs with all the multi-currency features switched on. So that's been really liberating, actually. So the ready for release tag is currently showing improved messaging around the roll-up summaries tab. So some users have found it quite confusing because of the history of the tool to which one to use, the custom object-based roll-ups or the metadata ones. So I've improved the UI around that. Also some minor tweaks to the user experience. I will also be routing some of the Apex errors because some of them are going to my mailbox to you guys. So there will be improvements on how the errors are routed. These are kind of things for unhandled exceptions. I have added test code for the parent object. So if you're doing roll-ups around parent-child that are merges, you have to have triggers on both the parent and the child. But in the past, you weren't able to do custom code. So if your parent object had some unique requirements, you couldn't write the test code to actually get it to run the test. So I've extended that. Another confusing element of the tool has been part of its transition away from custom objects to custom metadata is that you kind of had these kind of shadow records in your custom objects that were created in the background by the tool when you use the metadata ones. And a lot of folks are confused about that because it's like, well, I'm using this over here, but why am I getting records there? So I've done away with that, and you won't see those shadow records anymore. So the other thing that I'm working on that isn't ready for release at the moment, and I'm kind of figuring out whether or not I hold this release or just release what I've got there, open to opinion. Let's see if I can find the particular issue that I raised, because it has got a screenshot associated with it. Why is that showing 3 issues? Okay, so I'm just going to go and look for enhancements. By the way, there is a lot of enhancement ideas. You can come up with a lot of great features. Here we go. So I'm going to create something called the Lookup Rollup Summaries homepage. And on that homepage will be some components that help you optimize the use of it, review the jobs that are running, and also, crucially, a profiler. Because the tool does allow you to use SQL, but sometimes it's not obvious that that's an optimized SQL for all the indexes. So it will monitor all the queries, and you'll be able to go to that component, you'll be able to see all the queries that it runs, and you'll be able to see whether they've got indexes on against them. If they haven't, you'll see the type of question you need to ask Salesforce support in order to get that index enabled. So that avoids things like the CPU, the timeout, and the error message, the rather long error message that tells you you've got a problem because you've not got an index search. So that's kind of what the major feature in comparison to the other things. Hopefully the Lookup Summaries homepage and the components on it will be a big win for folks wanting to make use of what's become quite a complex tool. So that's the driver behind that.
All right, hopefully I gave you all some time to think of some other good questions, Randy. If not, you're going to force me to ask him some questions, so good. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Can I ask a question on the flow, which you just demoed before?
Yeah, sure.
What were the components, elements, or variables you're passing to? Like, were they from Apex or from Lightning component in the flow?
In the last demo that I did?
Yes.
So they were coming from Apex code. So there was Apex code that was behind those 2 utilities, the mass updater and the dynamic flow component. So actually, the dynamic flow component is using Apex to call flow, and then Doug's was using the REST API. They both end up calling Flow Engine, but one uses the REST API, one uses Apex. So all the parameters were being passed through the code paths in those 2 tools.
Who else?
Andy, the dependency API was, well, incredible, right? I mean, this is something that, you know, consultants, when I was doing that, just to figure things out, where things existed, this would be incredible. So 2 questions related to that. First, what doesn't the dependency API search? And second, is if it's in pilot, do we need to contact AEs to get access to that?
Yeah, okay, so we have expressed its current metadata types in the release notes. Actually, yeah, the release notes that should come out later this week will have a new section at the bottom that'll list the metadata types. And yes, I'm not 100% sure how all of this process works yet in Salesforce, but the guidance that you're given there is contact your Salesforce individual, which I guess might mean your account manager, or if you're an ISV, your technical account manager, whoever's responsible for managing your account. Strange noise. Okay. So yes, contact those. If you're really struggling, obviously, you guys know where to find me on social media, but please don't bombard me. Try and find that route first. So yes, that's the broad guidelines on how that works.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So first of all, I'm a big fan of you for your book, Enterprise Architecture.
Thank you.
I especially made up here, especially to watch your demo.
Awesome. Thanks, dude.
So one of the things around the flows is I'm interested around the transaction control when you're in a nested flow situation.
Yeah.
If I wanted to break the transaction to create a new transaction, so what approach would I have to be taking?
Yeah, as far as my understanding goes, is that if you're in Apex and you invoke a flow, you're still in the Apex transaction. So I haven't tested this yet, but my first inclination would be try and use a save point around the flow invocation. So you're going to be in Apex using the Apex interview API that I showed on the slide to run your flow. You do a start. And if you, for any reason you want to roll back, I would have created a save point before that and then done the save point rollback. So basically that's underpinned on the expectation that flow plays by the same transaction context as Apex in that case. So save points is the short answer to your question, but I personally haven't tested that.
Anybody got one last burning question they really want to ask Andy? Andy, one of the reasons I was excited to have you here was, you've gone inside the mothership now. Any just kind of quick thoughts about, what that experience has been to go from ISV partner Salesforce community to go inside of Salesforce, and just real quick on the vision for for what you're doing as a part of the product team.
Yeah, sure. And the experience, as you can expect from such a large organization onboarding, is super slick. It was day one. At the end of that, I was set up with my phone, my laptop. There was IT engineers swarming me, helping it out, and it was real. It was a real whistle-stop experience, but I hit the ground running on day 2 with all I needed, and they have a kind of concierge feature where you can go in and just ask anything. So I raised a ton of tickets on that, made myself popular. And so the experience after that in terms of my skill set and background has been really pleasurable. Everybody's very keen to get my viewpoint and understanding from an ISV and developer perspective. So a lot of the time I'm balancing between my day job in terms of my main targets and also just going to meetings and talking to other PMs. I spend a lot of time talking to the flow PMs, very enjoy doing that with that team. But in terms of the real driver, as some of you probably have already figured out through a survey that I sent out in February, is all about language and runtime. So I'm very passionate about improving the language and runtime for the platform and making sure that we're spending more time writing business logic code and less time writing code that we saw. While magical and wonderful, it was a lot of effort in the starter packs to actually get some of the stuff going that we saw with the batch Apex and other processing techniques. So I'm very passionate about language and runtime within Salesforce. And if you want to know a little bit more about sort of the way I'm thinking about that, check out the survey. It's still open, actually. It's on my Twitter feed. But some exciting things coming down the road. Not so many things I can talk about, unfortunately, but I am really excited about some of the possibilities where we can take the language and runtime for the platform, and that's my main passion and one of the key reasons for joining Salesforce, to make a difference in that area.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Andy. Let's hear it for Andy.
Thank you.